While the new House Speaker Mike Johnson is calling this week's mass shootings in Maine a tragedy, but says this is not the time to talk about new gun safety legislation.
We are receiving information about this horrific tragedy. It has moved everyone in the Congress, as you might imagine. Our hearts go out to all those involved, the families, of course, of the victims, and we're so grateful for law enforcement. We trust and hope and pray that they're able to apprehend this individual as quickly as possible. There's no more injury or loss of life. At the end of the day, the problem is the human heart. It's not guns, it's not the weapons. At the end of the day, we have to protect the right of the citizens to protect themselves, and that's the Second Amendment. And that's why our party stands so strongly for that. This is not the time to be talking about legislation. We're in the middle of that crisis right now.
You know, he knows that's not true. It's not the human heart. He knows that the United States has a problem unique to these type of shootings. And Caddy, we bring you again in here. Again, it's not the human heart that's a problem here. It's as Willie said, it's a diseased mind. It's not video games. It's not mental health alone. It's the availability of guns. And also, just I want you to speak on that again. But also, I can't believe we actually have a politician that will say in 2023, after a shooting, now is not the time to talk about mass shootings. Look at these numbers that we showed last hour. The fact is, there have already been 566 mass shootings so far in 2023. If now is not the time, what do we have to do? Wait 5, 6, 7 years to talk about this? There are no breaks in America anymore between mass shootings. The numbers have accelerated so quickly in this stat that it is simply preposterous to say it's not the time to talk about mass shootings after a mass shooting, because, again, we have more mass shootings in America every year than we have days in the year.
Yeah, I mean, look at those numbers. There would never be a moment when you didn't have a day without a mass shooting. And so conveniently, I guess, for the Speaker, that would mean that you could never talk about it. It is a choice that America makes that other countries have chosen not to make. In other countries around the world that have had mass shootings, like the one in Australia, like the one in Dunblane in Scotland, countries took action after those mass shootings and they banned the kind of weapons that were causing them. And guess what? There haven't been mass shootings in either of those countries since that action was taken. So it is possible to take action. And I know all of the arguments about how the fact that there are so many guns out there in society now that it wouldn't make a difference. But doing, for example, what Elise has mentioned, you know, taking the magazines away, looking at that assault weapons ban. In the United States, you chose to implement an assault weapons ban in 1994. You've done it. You did it. And guess what? The number of mass shootings in that period went down. You were 70% less likely to be killed by a mass shooting in the United States during the assault weapons ban than you were before or after it. So we know what can be done. We know it has results. There are images from other countries that have done it, examples from other countries. And the argument that it's about mental health or the human heart or video games doesn't hold water, because all of those things exist in every other country around the world. Yeah. And this is America's exceptional problem.
It really is. And I've got to say, Republicans talk like such losers when this problem comes up. Oh, there's nothing we can do. There's nothing we can do. Yeah, there is. There is something we can do. It's just like, I will just say, over the past couple weeks, people said there's nothing we can do with Israel and the Palestinian problem. It's unfixed. No, you can't say that. You've got to go in. You've got to fix it. And whether that's like destroying Hamas and then pressuring Israel and Palestinian authorities to get to the table and broker a peace deal. I mean, there's nothing we can do is not an option. It's never an option. And Republicans only talk that way when they don't want to do anything. Just think about what they're saying. There's nothing we can do. What they're saying is, like Willie said earlier today, you know, the price of freedom are fathers and sons being gunned down and massacred at family bowling night. The cost of freedom are Baptists going to church on Sunday mornings to worship the Lord and getting gunned down by weapons of war. By the way, we talk about the deaths in those heinous incidents, we don't talk about the scars that remain, and not just the mental scars that remain, but the people who are hobbled, the people who are shattered, the people who have trouble walking, breathing, living after being in a war zone, whether it's at a country music festival or a Baptist church or family night in a bowling alley in the middle of Maine. Just think about it. Just think about it. Really, it is. And again, the most offensive things, there's some things that we can't handle. There's some things we can't control. This is something we can control. This is a choice. We don't have to live like this. This is a choice. And it's going to be complicated. Just like peace in the Middle East is going to be complicated. But you know, smart people have done it before. And we've got to move forward doing it. But this whole, we can't even talk about it. Please, what a cop-out.